Spectrum Extra on Radio 1 FM 90. An extra hour of analysis and discussion of the topical issues of the week. Brought to you by Housing Finance Bank, a financial institution regulated by Bank of Uganda. Housing Finance Bank, we make it easy.
Your views, our interviews on Spectrum, Radio 1 FM 90.
Good evening, and thank you very much for joining us on this edition of Spectrum Extra, when we review the major events of the week. My name is Kenneth Lukwagandason, your host. Today, we'll be looking at the happenings at the NAM Summit, especially the address of the new chairperson, and also the key issues that have come out so far. Among them, we have seen a focus on the Israel-Palestine conflict. How can it end? The African Union has taken a stand in a statement which was presented there by the chairperson of the commission. We saw people who have been invited as observers in this summit, including Turkey, also taking a tough stand on this particular issue. And for Turkey, they're actually saying a two-state solution should be put forward. We have seen also NAM countries talking about reforming the UN Security Council, where they want to see more representation on a permanent basis from countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. They are saying they can no longer stand a situation where they are being excluded from that very important UN body where decisions that touch peace and other issues around the globe are made. At the moment, we only have superpowers who have even veto powers when it comes to the manner in which the UN Security Council works. There are so many other things, including issues around bilateral, financial, and trade as far as this conference has so far been conducted. Today, we heard from President Yoweri Museveni, who has assumed the leadership of this particular body, and he was bitter and saying the Western countries, the powerful countries, should stop interfering and giving orders to developed countries. He actually said their statements that are directed to such countries, telling them on what to do, on what the priorities should be, a sign of bigotry. He actually says some of them are sick, and he says they have no business telling countries like Uganda, where there are freedom fighters, to actually do what they want. We'll be looking at that statement and what it implies in terms of global dynamics when you look at the operations of the non-aligned movement. We know this week we woke up on yesterday, that is Thursday, with sad news about the passing of the Honorable Cecilia Atim Ogwal. Some people have widely known her as the Iron Lady of Ugandan politics. We are told she succumbed to cancer while on treatment in India. Of course, we have had so many people talking about her, how she has been an astute debater, a politician who pushed for good governance, constitutionalism, and women emancipation. And on countless occasions, we have seen her actually playing what some people would call mature politics, and chose to refer to President Yoweri Museveni as his brother, something that some people did not understand, wondering what kind of relationship she actually had with President Yoweri Museveni, although she has always explained that belonging to different political parties does not mean that we are no longer Ugandan. So what legacy does she leave behind in Parliament, in the general political land, our platform in our country? We'll be able to review those two issues, and I have a panel of four in studio. Ms. Perry Aritua, Executive Director, Women Democracy Network, Uganda chapter. She's a lawyer, pundit on governance and human rights matters. Good evening, and thank you very much for once again joining us, Ms. Perry Aritua.
Thank you, Kenneth. Good evening, listeners, viewers, and my fellow panelists.
In studio, Dr. James Tueheyo, Senior Officer in the Office of the President, member of the Central Executive Committee of the ruling NRM movement. President Yoweri Museveni today saying the NRM has never been a party, so we'll refer to it as a movement, where he represents workers. Good evening, and thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Tueheyo.
Good evening, Kenneth. Good evening, my colleagues here, the panelists, and good evening, the listeners and the viewers, and all those who are with us, listening to us.
Imam Eid Kasozi, a lecturer at the Islamic University in Uganda. He's a farmer, member of the Justice Forum Party, JEMA. Imam Eid Kasozi, thank you very much for joining us once again.
Good evening, viewers, listeners, and fellow panelists. It is always a pleasure
Imam is
to be on the spectrum.
Imam is from Munyonyo, where things are happening. How are things there, Imam?
My village is called the Mawanga.
Mawanga.
Munyonyo are our neighbors.
Munyonyo are your neighbors.
Yes.
How are things around there? I think you're reaping from the delegates who are around in that place.
They don't stop. They don't stop. The vehicles run very fast. The people are not allowed to pass nearby we are blocked at both entries. Maybe about a kilometer from where the summit is taking place. Maybe there was an attempt to repair our roads haphazardly, and the planting not flowers, palm trees, I think everywhere.
The full-grown ones.
Including, no. Of course, they are still planting even now, including in more or less tarmac. So we are always, I think, unprepared for some of these programs. That is the unfortunate part of it. And the end result is the product does not really become where you can compare it. In 2007, a similar scenario happened. They worked on 3 roads, including Salama Road. Today, Salama Road is impassable.
All right. Our fourth panelist is Mr. Nicholas Opio, team leader at Chapter for Uganda, human rights lawyer, pundit on governance and human rights matters. Good evening, and thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Nicholas Opio.
Well, thank you very much. Good evening to the listeners and to my fellow panelists. It gives me great pleasure to see Imam Kasozi again. It's been over 4 years. It also gives me great pleasure to see Dr. James Tuheo. The last time we interacted, he was a passionate crusader for the welfare of teachers. I hope
Even now.
He has not forgotten his roots.
I haven't given up.
Good to see you, and of course my great sister, Council Aretua Perry.
And you listeners, we do welcome you to be part of this discussion by sharing with us your views on the WhatsApp line, which is 0703 090 090. Help us to shape the discussion that is going on here in studio. Well, let me set the stage by playing a clip of the speech by President Yoweri Museveni as he assumed the chairmanship of the Council of Heads of State of the NAM Summit. Take a listen.
The oppressors miscalculate when they use their temporary advantage in science and technology to think that they can use that to indefinitely oppress other people. The oppressed will learn, catch up, and defeat the oppressor. That is why empires always collapse. People are supposed to be free, not to be conquered by empires. We should only have free associations of nations, people of common or shared origin, interacting for mutual advantage with the peoples of the world. We, the resistance fighters of Uganda, are flabbergasted and look down with contempt at the philosophical, ideological, and strategic shallowness of some of the actors of the world. Why not respect freedom of everybody? If you say you are a Democrat, how can you say you are a Democrat and yet you want other people to be slaves? Why do you not seek to influence people by your good example instead of manipulation, lectures, and threats? These elements of exploitation are totally unnecessary and only propelled by greed. We are therefore not impressed and cannot be part of the morbid, I want the word morbid, sickly bigotry of uni-ideological thinking of this or that type. When somebody says, this is the only correct idea, if you don't believe in this, I will attack you. Really, this earth has been here for 30 billion years. The human society has been here for the last 4.5 million years. Now you come, within 20 years, you think what you think is the only correct thing, you must be sick. You therefore should not have the audacity to impose on the society you live in, let alone the world, your narrow, uni-ideological orientation. The strength of non-aligned movement should be used to exercise considerable influence, particularly at the UN, for the effective transformative process for a better common future. In the negotiations for the Pact of the Future, the outcome document of the upcoming United Nations Summit of the Future, to be held in New York in September 2024, we should clearly define priorities that favor developing countries by maintaining unity, solidarity, and collective coordination among our member states in line with the Bandung principles. I assure you all that my team, led by the permanent representative in New York, has my full support to chair the coordinating bureau of the non-aligned movement.
Well, President Yoweri Museveni there, chairperson of the non-aligned movement summit of heads of state, giving his speech there. And we'll begin by looking at that speech in detail. And I'll begin with you, Ms. Perry Aritua. You've heard from the new chairman of the non-aligned movement setting the pace. What's your take?
Thank you, Kenneth. Maybe just to begin, that the non-aligned movement is unknown to many Ugandans. I was at a conference, I think 2 days ago, 17th year, and some people thought it was a girl's name. Others will say, so Namugerwa, Nam, so people have no clue. And you know, these are actually old people. It was until one of the senior women in the women's movement then gave a history of the non-aligned movement, its founding, why it was founded. So I imagine there are also a number of our listeners who don't know what NAM is about and why it was formed. Maybe just for emphasis, it was formed in 1961, but that followed 1955 conference in Bandung. I think the president has mentioned Bandung, by the way, is in Indonesia. Most people also didn't know where it was. Then 1961, it was formed by four presidents then, the president of Ghana, there was Yugoslavia then, Egypt and India. And it was formed, one, to oppose colonialism and imperialism. It was formed to oppose racial discrimination, advocate for sovereign equality. And so those were some of its objectives, and then it was also meant to protect the nascent freedom of the newborn independent states. Because if you notice, countries like Ghana, many of the African countries were now getting independence at that time, same to Asia. So that's why it was formed. Now, fast forward to after the, right now, it's major, it's the 120 states are actually part of the UN. But they are not represented on the Security Council, and the Security Council of the UN, and there has been calls, and I think from the president's statement there's a call for more representation by countries from either Asia, Latin America, and Africa, because the Security Council only has 5 permanent members. So most of us Ugandans don't actually know what it's about. If you look at its principles, then some of them are still alive up to now. Because you look at racial discrimination, especially against minorities, black, brown, it's still very prevalent. Right now we have neoliberalism, where the powerful states try to use all types of pressure to control former colonies. They use economic, political, and cultural pressure. It's very alive. So when countries are poor, like most developing countries are, in terms of resource rich, but poor in terms of governance, in terms of really how they manage resources, access to technology, then they become a minority in a sense, even when we know that these countries have the biggest population. If you look at Asia, Africa, that's where most of the world's population lives. India, is I think now actually overtaken China in terms of the population of their countries. So now back to the president's statement. There are a number of things which he mentioned. Some of them are a bit ironical because when he speaks about especially not respecting freedoms of others, I think for Uganda right now, unfortunately, we have seen some of the leaders currently, I don't know, the police usually uses the term that they are for their personal security.
Preventive
arrests.
That's an explanation.
So some of them are actually under house arrest. I think that's the word. So for me, the principles that set up the NAM should equally apply to our individual countries, because actions speak louder than words. If we are to enable Ugandans to enjoy their freedoms, of course within the law, it therefore becomes ironical when you're pointing fingers and then the actions within are almost contrary to what you're saying. But in a nutshell, I think it would be good for especially the countries based in Africa, Asia, and Latin America to have representation in the UN Security Council, because we know that it makes a lot of decisions in terms of peace and security matters. We know what is happening in Sudan, we know what's happening in Gaza and Palestine, and their veto powers have an effect on whether these countries are peaceful or not. So for me, that is what I would like to say in that regard.
All right, let's hear from Mr. Nicholas Opio. Your take on the speech of the president, even before we dig deeper into some of the key issues that have so far come out of this meeting.
You know, I think that Museveni's speechwriter must have been obsessed lately with Yuval Noah Harari's book, Sapiens, the history of humankind. There's a certain intellectual inclination in his speeches to the deep historical analysis of Professor Yuval Noah on this Homo sapiens and humankind and the size of the brain. Sometimes I think bordering on complete conspiracy theories. But that's besides the point. It's just an observation I thought I would make, having had him for the last 3 times speaking. There's a heavy plagiarization, if you like, of Professor Yuval's book, The History of Mankind. It's an interesting book that I think you should also go and read. It's quite thick, but you see what I mean if you read the book. But that said, you know, NAM is a far bigger platform than the pet project of Pan-Africanism, of Museveni's pet project. It's much, much wider. But you could see that he was struggling to rise to the occasion to encapsulate the broader global agenda that NAM represents. And you can understand this is his first time chairing that kind of global, platform. But I hope that he can transcend the petty pet project of Pan-Africanism and his squabbles with the global West. He calls them morbid. I thought it was quite a strong term to say morbid ideologies and morbid people.
Sickly.
Morbid is actually sickly. And so I think he can rise to the occasion. I hope his speechwriters can move him away from his pet project because this occasion requires global leadership, that you must address the concerns of the peoples of Latin America, the peoples of the Far East, developing countries, but you're also doing so now in a different context within which, from that which gave rise to NAM. NAM was really against anti-colonialism and all of that kind of stuff, and that is fast spent. The trailblazing leaders for the NAM movement were people like Abdel Nasser of Egypt, Kwame Nkrumah, who were really fighting for the colonized states. And I think that objective is spent. The challenge for Museveni now is to reimagine NAM in light of contemporary global paradigms, because you can't hold on to the 1960s conception of NAM. And doing so, you must do so also within what I see as a condition of deep inequalities between the global West and the global South, really arising from, I think that it's a structural historical issue, but it is what we have, that even the man who is railing against the West depends on the West for his survival. I always say, and I've said this here before, that if I buy detergent and water in your house, I sure have a right to complain about the hygiene of your family members, including your wife or your husband. Exactly because you are still dependent on this global financial system and architecture should really call for deeper reflection and a bit of humility, because as day follows night, without them, you really will crumble. I mean, he himself has had to make an intellectual somersault. Came here as a Marxist, but he's become, I think, one of the most liberal, folks you can know, liberalizing Uganda's economy, selling away her public enterprises. So he's made intellectual somersault, and I think that he should be able to appreciate this thing. The third point really is to go back to, even just to remind ourselves of the founding principles of NAM in the Bandung principles. The first one really was about the observance of human rights. And that was foremost, the question of human rights. And yet, you are leading a group whose first principle was the observance of human rights and the UN Charter, including international obligations. And so we've got to remind our leaders about these principles, and that since he's going to chair this principle, perhaps he could be reborn and have a different conception and idea about fundamental rights and freedoms. As Perry said, you have a conference happening and the opposition is locked up in their houses for expressing themselves. You have poor people being thrown off the streets. I witnessed something very interesting last night. A palm tree that was drying, they took it out and brought a fresh one. So
Imam has told you they're still planting, even now as we speak.
They are replacing the drying ones and fresh ones. You had the stories of streetlights being removed from some districts being brought here. You extreme deprivation, extreme repression. You have really, it's a conference of the rich for many Ugandans. Even myself coming here, I almost turned away because they blocked all the roads. It took me an hour and a half to make it from Wampe Avenue to Duster Street, because they blocked all the roads. It's a conference of the rich. So we've got to remind these leaders about the principles of NAM, and the key and first among them was the respect for human rights, the UN Charter, and international obligations.
Right, Imam, let's hear from you, your take about the speech of the new chairperson of the NAM Summit.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank the two colleagues for what they have put up. This one has reminded one of the statement Councillor Pugh has made me recall the tradition of the Prophet, where he said, the giving hand, the upper hand, is always more powerful and respected than the receiving hand. As long as we are still receiving, and also even lying to ourselves that we are non-aligned, when in real sense we are aligned. And know the Islamic principle does not support to be non-aligned. It supports being aligned, but you are sincere, you are open, and
transparent.
When you are administering justice, you are impartial, including on your own self. That even when you are making judgment on your own self, you should be as sincere as possible, as impartial as possible. The verse of the Quran, for it goes on to tell you yourself, your parents, your relatives, the rich and the poor. Unfortunately, what we are seeing is the poor, as they prefer to call us, people of the south, irrespective of where, even if you live in the north and you are poor, you are taken, you migrate to the north. And Australia, which is in the south, because it's powerful, it goes to the north. So those are some of the dilemmas. What is critical and important, in view of what our colleagues have highlighted, is that we must go back to the first principles of saying, why was this movement? Why is it that, by the way, do we still need it today in view of what is going on? 3, can we sustain its demands? Because the people they are talking about, was he Nehru, the one of India? Gandhi, was he Gandhi or Nehru? Nehru. Jamal Abdel Nasser, Kwame Nkrumah. The fourth country was which country?
Yugoslavia. With Tito.
Now, when you look at all those, who amongst our leaders of our times can even go as far as knee high of those people and their principles.
Imam, do hold your thoughts there. Let's go for this break. When we return, I'll allow you to actually conclude that point. Dear listeners, be part of this discussion. Share with us your views. Use the WhatsApp line, which is 0703-090-090. Let's go for a break now. When we return, Imam Idi Kasozi will conclude his thoughts, and then we'll hear from Dr. James Tweheyo, and then sum up the discussion before we move on to the other topic. Keep your comments coming. Spectrum Extra continues after this break.
Spectrum Extra, Fridays 7 to 9 p.m. on Radio 1 FM 90.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on Spectrum Extra as we review the major events of the week. At the moment, we are looking at what has been happening at the NAM Summit today. Major highlight, President Yoweri Museveni assuming the leadership of this group and making a tough statement there in which he actually tells the West, the developed world, not to interfere with the agenda of the non-aligned movement. He actually says they should be considered as equal partners and should be talking about things that can bring about mutual benefit. He actually says if you are democratic and somebody promoting human rights, let others also be free to do what they actually want. Yes, this evening, Ms. Perry Aritua, Executive Director, Women Democracy Network, Mr. Nicholas Opio, Team Leader, Chapter for Uganda, Dr. James Tweheyo, Senior Officer in the Office of the President, and Imam Idi Kasozi, Lecturer at the Islamic University in Uganda, member of the Justice Forum Party, and he's also a farmer. Before we went for the break, he was on the floor. Yes. Imam Idi Kasozi.
I was saying that when you make a comparison between the four people who sat and decided to start this movement and the leaders we have today, irrespective of where they come from, they don't even measure up to knee height.
Why would you say so, Imam?
Yes, and those people were principled and they stood for what they said. Our leaders today, they are survivors. That's the first place. How do I survive? Two, they have the characteristics of poor leaders or weak leaders. They fear the people they lead, they lie to us, and they cheat us. After this NAM thing and the G77, you wait what is going to come up.
But good enough, they will audit themselves. They will actually be the ones to tell you that things have gone
whether
wrong.
they audit themselves or they are audited by others, the performance still remains the same. Why? We have deliberately refused to change. We have deliberately denied people who have expertise opportunity to demonstrate that expertise on behalf of our country or our countries. The few that have made an attempt, you know where they are. They are far away. So what is interesting, President Museveni is a good speaker. He reminds us a lot about history, much as he himself denied his own history. He wrote it down and later denied it and changed it. So
is that so?
Yes. Master seed. You get the two.
I have both of
those
them.
of us who have both of the two. Actually, you don't need to say you have both. They will come and steal the other if you are not careful. I'm telling you. I'm telling you. Because to some people, actually,
there are two editions.
Yes, holding it. There are not two editions. One was, I think, like if I use it, the Quran, it was rubbed off. The word has gone. God tells us in the Quran that He does not remove something He has given unless He has replaced it with a better one. But the new one is not better than the old one.
Okay.
For those who are critical readers.
According to you.
Those are critical readers. Therefore, in view of the words President Museveni has said, I would maybe say, as the chairman now of this group, now I think 135 countries. There are now 135 countries that are in NAM. He should let the leaders of these countries, especially those I have seen that have come, many of them, whom I follow where they come from, first implement what they want others to implement. They should create room for others to lead. They should listen. They should dialogue, and they should really help our communities to get out of, like the issue of pushing people off the streets. I am happy with them on that one. But the way they did it is what I am opposed to. And the second thing is, immediate after CHOGM, sorry, after this NAM meeting and G77, they will come back. That meaning you destabilize the people for no purpose. If you are not determined to tell them, please don't come back again, they shouldn't have jeopardized their activities. Because some of us who are community leaders, we are the recipients of some of these problems. I can tell you, ever since it started in our place, I don't know how many, the number of people that have come in my small office at the most, telling me that, my small capital was done away with. So last but not least, our leaders in the non-aligned movement or in these countries should improve their leadership styles. They should respect, like I think Opio said, human rights. They should respect human dignity. They should respect. You see, in our state, I was looking at the economics of this country, and I found that I cannot issue a check of 11 million to a person. If I issued one, it will not be honored. They want me, may I make another transaction? You see, if I'm going to pay somebody 11 million, I have to make 2 checks. And every check is a cost on me. Then that means, therefore, our economic situation is not very healthy. Those are the issues, I think, what NAM wanted to address, because they did not want to be dominated by the so-called powerful states. But the powerful states will remain so. Then the issue of Security Council. The way we appear and the way we have decided to play this game, sometimes siding with the oppressors who are among the 5 will never allow us to have opportunity to sit on those. Being the majority in UN, let them become strong enough and say, we are pulled out of UN.
If you're not...
When they pull out, UN will remain with about 66 countries. Now, if it's actually 60, they will remain as 61, because I think UN has 196. Then we shall remain with only... then why shouldn't these ones now come to us? Because much of the bulk of the resources that are untapped, or what we call raw materials, are in these 135. But the other ones just come, rape them, and go free. Right. And then we clap for them.
All right. Now, let's hear from Dr. James Tweheyo. And Dr. James Tweheyo, I've followed closely President Yoweri Museveni, at least in the last 5 speeches he has made. He seems to be so much obsessed with this issue of Western governments not interfering in the affairs of developing countries, especially Uganda. He has been actually pounding that issue in our faces, in our heads. What exactly could be the problem? Is it a genuine issue? Could he be under some sort of pressure? What exactly is going on?
First of all, I want you and everybody listening to understand that President Museveni has never worked on pressure. In fact, if you want to know and understand his character, the more you push him on pressure, the more he calms down. And he listens and takes action. And he doesn't panic over issues. So by the time he's to speak and say all these, he has examined what he wants to say and is interested in anybody knowing and understanding what his mind is. So that is a very, very clear issue that I want everybody to understand. So if you understand his character, that's exactly what I can tell you. Secondly, when we are talking of NAM, we really need to understand that somebody should have a clear feeling of what we're talking about. The current average world population is about 8 billion. And if we are talking of NAM, and we are talking about 4.5 billion, and you add China, because you see, when we bring China on board fully now, which is over 3 billion people, then you'll understand that the world is being ruled by a very, very small population, the minority. And this minority takes control of the wealth, takes control of the peace, dictates on democracy, and mention all that. So in this case, if the majority doesn't stand up against the minority, then subsequently problems will come. And that's why President Museveni is very tough and hard on this minority. And if you look back at the intent and the purpose of NAM, it was to make sure that at least peace is maintained. It was to make sure that there is promotion of economic growth. It was to oppose colonial impact and the military alliances. It was also to make sure that they protect the environment and human rights. Yes, you can talk of anything, human rights and all that. In Uganda, we have issues ourselves. Yes, we have issues of human rights, but we also take advantage sometimes of situations. Somebody was talking about some of these roads being blocked. Somebody was talking about some of our colleagues in the country being asked not to leave home. You know, there are some situations which we need to look at realistically and ask ourselves, why? How should we handle this? If you are in this position, even in your own house, when you have visitors and a kid comes from the bedroom and comes running and making noise and saying, you see, my brother has beaten me or stepped on me, what do? You say sit down in the sitting room and cry? No. So some of these things really should be handled with the civility they deserve. I'm a person who is good at advocacy, but the timing of some of the actions will defeat their intent and purpose. When our colleagues outside there say, no, we want to come and plant trees in the roads that may be used by the same visitors, then you can see they are deliberately doing that so that they can entrap you and you are seen and put in a light to say you are somebody who is not promoting the rights. But in this case, the president was spot on, was very clear. He was not on the matters here. He was on the matters that affect everybody who falls within the non-aligned movement. And by the way, when he says, look, these people are giving us ideas, some which are morbid. Yes. Do you think, for example, when we are talking of these people who are doing other things, forcing us to do many other things that are not acceptable by our own beliefs and cultures, don't you think one can comfortably say so? Although, I agree with my colleagues, sometimes when you are dealing with the rest of the public and the world, sometimes you have to be a little bit more diplomatic so that you are understood by the good who are living among those who are the bad. Because I want to believe that not everybody who is in the north, as my brother Imam Kasozi was saying, I don't want to believe that everybody who is in the north is as bad as all those people in the north who dictate over us. Even there are some people who say, no, I think what we're doing is not right. That is why slave trade stopped. Of course, there were other reasons why it stopped. One of them being that it was no longer profitable and economic to use slaves when you could use horsepower and other forces that could produce work easily and faster and less costly. But also, there are those among them who are saying, look, this is not right. So I think that's where I would say, yes, sometimes there is a need for polishing. But that one should not divert us from the intent and the purpose of this NAM conference. Yes, there are some flaws. Yes, the flowers could have been planted late, which in my view is not proper. But would we have left it? Perhaps sometimes let's also take advantage and take chance. Now that the visitors have come, let's watch the space and see whether these flowers will grow.
We had a chance with Chogam. Actually, in some places where they're planting palm trees, I think during that time of Chogam, they were planted. What happened to them?
Of course, it was a hazard work, as Imam Kasozi was saying. And we hope.
And the same thing has happened.
No, we should have learned a lesson from that.
At what point should we hold the state? Because this is not even about the government. It's about the state itself.
The problem, in my view, is not only the state. The problem is generally government. Because when this thing is planned, and money is supposed to be raised and given in time, and it is not, it gives room for any other person to do what they want with the money. And by the way, That's a replica, I must admit. That's a replica of what is happening, especially in many of these other government programs, especially in local governments. They wait for the release of the budget. The budget doesn't come. On the 30th of May or somewhere around there, when we're coming to June, the money is released. When this money is released, it is either spent on air or...
On 1st July, it is
No,
returned.
it is either spent on air or returned. And this is something that we must learn from and get things done right. We must admit that there are weaknesses somewhere and get them solved. But then again, those ones should not divert us from the intent and the purpose of the non-aligned movement and the reason why it was formed.
All right.
We also should stamp our chest, by the way, for having been given the opportunity to host and chair.
We have NAM, we have G77
Absolutely.
plus China, and we also
No,
had
even recently
IGAD.
had we even recently had
We had
the
a
Commonwealth
speakers meeting also
So
here.
the other question then should be, why Uganda? What is special with us that all these now are coming here? Don't you think there is also some good in us that we should test and see? What is this that is enticing all these other world countries to come to Uganda and not any other country? So we should also thank God and thank the leadership for lobbying and accepting and being accepted by all those other countries to come around.
All right. Very important thing there. When we prepare badly, we lose the opportunities. So many things that we will be able to get out of conferences, not just because they're happening, but thereafter, in terms of building on the likely gains in the areas of tourism, trade deals, investments, etc. Are we preparing well? And if not, what could be the problem? How would you advise government to actually up its game to be able to do that?
Actually, most people at that conference, which I told you about, where they thought Nam was a woman, were wondering, when did we know that we're going to hold this conference? Because you see, when you know you're going to have visitors, you prepare early. So the planting of trees at the late stage actually denies us opportunities. The fact that our roads are the way they are is not a good thing, because tourism is easier when infrastructure is good. And that's why most of our neighboring countries, especially those who have worked on infrastructure, Tanzania, Kenya, Rwanda, have really invested in building their roads. So you can see the difference between them and us when it comes to infrastructure. So it's important to prepare early so that you don't get a frustrated population. Because if there was more information, about this conference, like 3 or 2 years back, when we knew that we were going to host it, you'd find more people support the fact that visitors are coming. But when people now feel inconvenienced because they don't even understand the conference, they don't understand the benefits for the country, it becomes difficult. And that's why ownership for any government program is important. But that only happens if there's enough information, if you're also dealing with some of the things that the public is frustrated about. Because like the issue of roads has been a constant pain in the, for most Ugandans. You look at ministers complaining. The other day I was reading X, and one minister was happy, a government minister actually, saying that it's good the opposition has joined her in terms of the outcry on the roads. That's a little shameful. So I think if we prepared early, we would reap the benefits. The population would be ready. We would know what is it, how do we benefit from this conference? Because I can tell you, most people actually don't know how Uganda benefits from this conference, especially unless you are within the circles that have prepared for it. But otherwise, the ordinary Ugandan, maybe who even has merchandise which is locally made, may not know how they would benefit from this conference. But I just wanted to also emphasize that there are a number of current issues that I think the NAM should be addressing. Apart from the issue of the wars, which are mentioned in Gaza, South Sudan, and then Ukraine, and their effects on us, there are issues of economic shocks. After COVID, many of our countries became poorer. The inequalities became more. So what is the conversation? Things that touch the population directly, the issues of climate change, the issues of access to this digital technology, because the world is moving, so those conversations for me are important because they have political, economic, and social attributes for the population. If you have a population that's able to access the internet, that's able to access enjoy the benefits of an economy that works, it becomes easier to develop. The other thing is, it would also be interesting to learn, like if you look at especially the countries in Asia, the Singapores of this world, they have moved so fast, So even just continuing to ask, how come we're still like this, and yet these countries that were part of, that are part of the NAM have moved far. What is the problem? And dealing with the problems that are rising. The last for me is the issue of monitoring and evaluation. After the conference, so what? How do we ensure that there is accountability? I'm not talking about the accountability for our funds, which is also important, but accountability for the recommendations that will come out, the actions that will be taken. But most of all, it is an opportunity, yes, and I think Uganda will be tested on how it uses that opportunity for the good of the country, but also for the countries within the NAM.
Mr. Nicholas Opio, your take on the level of preparation, how we actually prepare. You're one of the people on this table who is widely traveled and has attended some of these meetings abroad. Where are we failing? Because at the end of the day, we need actually to maximize the opportunities that come with hosting conferences. Dr. James Tweheyo is saying we should be asking ourselves the question, why do they choose us from all these so many people who actually bid, who actually compete to host this kind of conferences?
No, the truth is that the Ugandan ambassador to the UN has done an incredible job in lobbying for this country. It's not just NAM, it's not just G77. You remember the contentious issues of the Entebbe Air Base and whether it should be moved to Kenya. So he's done a tremendous good job to bring this kind of things here. And I think in many ways, we've got to give him the kudos. But that said...
That is Ambassador Donia Ayebare.
Okay. He's done quite a good job together with his deputy, who is now back in Kampala, Mr. Philip Odida. Fantastic career diplomat. It shows you that if you have people who know what they're doing, the country reaps some benefit. This kind of ambassadors we send, like Nelson Ochegere, who went to Nigeria, This one who was a journalist, became an MP, lost a seat, is now in South Africa, don't understand the ropes. So a quality ambassadorial corps would be very helpful for this country.
I must tell you, those people were vetted and they passed the test.
No doubt. Whether it's a vetting or I don't know, but they passed through a sieve. How big the hole in the sieve is, I don't know. But I'm saying the sieve could be smaller, tighter, better. We have people who are really, really career diplomats who know that they are carrying the country's interest. But that said, what Dr. James Tweheyo has just said is that those in charge of the state are not different than a village woman or a village man who waits until guests are around the corner to sweep the compound. That's really what it boils down to. You have people who just do not care. They just don't care.
Could it be a question of resources? Dr.
It is not
Tweheyo
resources.
says resources come in late.
It is not resources, and I can tell you it's not resources. First, it is just understanding this kind of processes, what it takes to hold an event like this. There's a deep lack of understanding on how to put up an event like this. We look at these events as opportunities to make deals, to make cuts, not as an opportunity to improve the infrastructure for this country. It's as if we never hosted CHOGM. We are beginning all over again, all over fresh, building a new conference center, tarmacking roads all over again, planting same trees again. If we had done CHOGM right, and you've got to look just right down south to Rwanda, doing something right leaves the country a legacy. And I think that what we have to appreciate is we don't have to look at this as a chance to make money. I've been in spaces where I've had people, civil servants complaining because for NAM, they had a NAM secretariat, a organizing committee, and so people at KCCA folded their hands. It is your NAM, you organize it. So they were not fixing drainages where they're supposed to fix it. we were putting pavers on Mukwano Road just a day before NAM started, because the technocrats folded their hands because there was nothing for them to take home. And so we've got to rid ourselves of the tendency of corruption and just how we view these events as a way to make money, not as a way to develop the country's infrastructure. It's sad. Go to the airport. This whole thing about the airport has been improved. How many terminals are there in Entebbe Airport? They just improved the arrival, the beautiful entrance and exit.
And not purposely for now. This has been a project.
Absolutely, it's still going on.
But
even
what
the
I'm saying,
expansion of the airport is still going on.
It's going, but the point is that we present these kind of things as if we do it for the event. But the last thing is to say this, that let's do this for the country, not because of NAM. Okay, let's do this for the country, not because of NAM. The point that the opposition leaders are seeking to make is that you're doing this because of NAM. The problems exist. Here are the problems. So they should hear that and say, don't pave roads because of NAM, because the roads that are being paved and done well are NAM roads, the roads where delegates pass. But deep down in Kololo, today I was driving on Prince Charles Avenue, which is the longest avenue going through what is supposed to be a place full of ambassadors. It's full of potholes. It's just full of potholes. And so let's do this for the country, not for NAM.
All right. Spectrum Extra on Radio 1 FM 90. Let's go for a break now. When we return, we'll see the views that are coming in from the listeners via the WhatsApp line, but we'll also be looking at the possibility of actually the things that NAM is deciding on taking effect. Will they actually be implemented, or we will be hearing the same things in the next meeting 3 years later when it actually happens in India? If I'm is it in India? It should be in India from what we've had. Spectrum Extra continues after this break. Well, thank you very much for staying with us live on Spectrum, coming to Spectrum Extra, coming to live on Radio 1 FM 90, reviewing the major events of the week. My guest, Ms. Perry Alitua, Executive Director at Women Democracy Network, Mr. Nicholas Opio, Team Leader at Chapter 4 Uganda, Dr. James Tueheyo, Senior Officer in the Office of the President, and Imam Idi Kasozi, Lecturer at the Islamic University in Uganda, and me, your host, Kenneth Lukwago Anderson. Please share with us your views via the WhatsApp line, and already I have some comments coming in. Let's sample them, and the panelists will be able to actually respond to you depending on the issues that you have actually put across. Let's look at the comments here. Somebody is also asking, how about flyover at Spear? I think this is the same discussion we're having about infrastructure. And then we have another comment. I think NAM should have focused on mobilizing its members to call for neutral global reserve currency. The UN World Economic and Social Survey 2010 called for the IMF special drawing rights, playing a bigger role in global finances as a neutral reserve trade currency away from the US dollar. For the last 3 years, the value of the US dollar against NAM currencies has strengthened. This has increased the debt stock of NAM countries and also increased the price of global commodities for the global south. This is what we should have discussed at NAM, not condemning Israel, Russia, America, or Iran. I think the summit was a huge flop with a weak agenda, sadly. We should have used this NAM conference to call upon the UN to have a new Bretton Woods moment to reform the global financial architecture. That's a comment coming in from Louis Kizito. Okello Patrick Bonyo from Busega. NAM can claim what they cannot deliver. NAM should focus more on economic empowerment of its member states. The already powerful NAM members should help the struggling members by creating meaningful business atmosphere. The business of attacking the West, you need them at some point. It's just confusing the ordinary person. Then somebody else writes and said, NAM outlived its founding objective, which was not being aligned to the West or East during the 60s, when countries were fighting for self-governance and avoiding being in the Cold War politics. However, today a developing country cannot claim to be non-aligned because our budgets rely a lot on foreign aid. That's world donations, grants, World Bank and IMF, etc. Now, our funders have to dictate a number of things in our countries, whether we like it or not. Then we have another comment. I have nothing to say about NAM. Well, that's another comment from Sharif. He has another comment there about the Honorable Cecilia Ogwal. We'll sample that comment when we begin discussing issues of the late Honorable Cecilia Ogwal. Spectrum Extra, Imam Kasozi has hit the point. All the autocrats are now more aligned with China and Russia. They are pretending to be non-aligned. Our president does not have any moral authority to bash anybody, let alone lead such organizations. That's a comment there from another listener who did not leave a name behind. African countries need to ban the export of minerals to Western countries and their allies, on top of boycotting goods from Western countries and their allies because of facilitating wars, sanctions, coups, and terrorism in African countries, so to attain the bargaining power with the Western countries and their allies. That's another comment there. Thanks a lot for the show. That is somebody called AJ Job, listening in from Namungona. President Museveni wants to run after people who support his Pakalast leadership, like China. He's against the U.S. because the U.S. changes leaders. Let him stop making noise when America is still helping and supplying mosquito nets. And then he says, rip iron. Good evening, Kenneth. In the news, President Museveni is elected NAM chairman until 2027. Can someone remain chairman even if he or she is not president? Well, I can say President Yoweri Museveni was not actually elected. There was no election for him to win. He just assumed the position of chairman because Uganda is the host of NAM this time around. Well, those are some of the comments coming, but about nothing. All right, these are comments which are not related to this particular topic. Well, we have heard from the listeners, and some people actually saying NAM has outlived its original intentions. Imam Id Kasozi, will these people be able to actually implement these things they have been talking about?
I don't want to agree with those who say it has outlived, when the first principle is about human rights. Human rights will be there forever. The only thing is actually reorganization and moving with the times. Because at least colonialism was defeated, but neo-colonialism is on. Two, independence was attained. Independence of what? Changing guards. But in terms of political, economic, and sometimes even social, look at SAGE, the project called SAGE. It is
for the elderly.
It is externally funded, and Uganda, as I think my colleague has put it, it has fed its own obligation.
Somebody has said here that we are even getting mosquito nets.
And the reason, and he knows the organizations that are paying money. That's why I think he's saying we cannot buy them. But the problem is not about that. Actually, the problem, much as my brother here to you has said, why Uganda? Okay, somehow. Somebody who is not very critical, he sees Uganda, which is a very peaceful country. But in real terms, when you go deep, we are bleeding. Recently, I have been talking.
That's why there are soldiers at every corner.
Recently, I talked to one of the senior leaders of the National Resistance Movement.
As their advisor.
What our cries as individuals is the same with him. He will tell you how he's not happy because of, I think, nepotism, corruption, lack of national spirit, which he's talking about. When people want to do work, if you want to do work for your family, for your country, and you are seeking to earn out of it only, then that work will never be perfect. I have told all my students run through, and the people who are in my gathering, that don't get out to work for money, to make money. Get out to do the work. The moment you do the work effectively and perfectly, you will get the money. Because you will get so many recommendations, and these recommendations will increase your rate of turnover. And consequently, you have. That's why a person who has only 1 acre of pineapples and me who has 20 acres, okay, we cannot reap the same. I have a lot of advantages over him because I can supply to be somebody who wants a big volume for some long time. For him, he will do it in a short time, and therefore that one affects. Okay. 2, because of my volume, big volume, even if I am earning only 100 on each, I finally make a big kill. Why? Because I'm big. Therefore, I would suggest that the leaders, the countries in NAM, their leaders, the technocrats they are in, should rediscover themselves and say, why did these tough men, Kwame Nkrumah, Tito of Yugoslavia, Jamal Abdel Nasser in
Egypt,
and Nehru in India, do this? But today, publicly, our president has maybe spoken what we want to hear. But when he begins to operate, he will do what the Baganda call okukukuta. You will find him with these same people he's blaming. And 2, they have even used him in the name of, for him he calls it Africa what? Pan-Africanism. Sending troops here, there. But you check, who is paying? Who is paying? The moment they refuse to pay, we pull out our soldiers. So these are indicators that much as we have what he has said, we have the resources, we have the assets, but we have failed to transform these assets into, not everybody who has an asset earns out of it. Very many people have a lot of assets, but they don't use them gainfully. Reason, they are not prepared. Therefore, I wanted maybe to wind up by saying that let us not frustrate even the technical people we have. For example, we have admired Ayebare, Adonia. The other day I saw him speak on one of the programs. I liked the way he was presenting his issues. The reason again maybe is because he's a career diplomat. He's doing something he's aware of. But these people are hand-picking. You have said they pass through the saving. Yes. Who is controlling it? All right. You saw, you have seen on the Electoral Commission, people rejected, some others, the others wholesome said, no, we go with this one. So those are the problems that we must address. All right. So whether it is Uganda, whether it is Tanzania, whether it is any other country, including even those you are speaking good of, Rwanda and whatever, they need to check again. They should go back and say, actually we should use the 4 starters as benchmarks, what we call appreciative inquiry. What is it that we appreciate from the founding fathers of this institution if we want to transform our own?
All right. Very quickly, let's move on to our next topic, and I'll begin with you, Dr. James Treheyo. We lost the Honorable Cecilia Atim Ogwal, known as the Iron Lady, and yesterday we received the news that she had succumbed to cancer. A burial program has already been issued, and we know her body will be arriving in the country on Sunday at around 2 p.m. And from the statement there, we see a number of a week-long activities that will take place before she is actually laid to rest in rest in Lango sub-region, where she actually hailed from. From your, so many things have actually been said about the Honorable Cecilia Ogwal, and how she conducted herself, the kind of politics she played, her contribution to governance and development in this country. Let's hear from you. What do you remember about her? What is her legacy as a politician and a leader in our country?
I have seen and heard the Honorable Cecilia Ogwal. They used to call her Cisse quite often, a number of people. I grew up looking up to her. The word I can say without doubt is that she's a stateswoman. She's a woman who would say what she feels, regardless of who you are, whether you're a friend or foe. She was somebody who would believe in what she believed in without necessarily degrading and looking down upon what other people believe in. She would judge a person as a person, give credit where it is due, and say no, and firmly no, and stand up against anybody to speak her mind. I personally met Cecilia at the time I was with the teachers, and I was leading the teachers, and she said, young man, in her words, said, young man, I'm very happy with you that you can say the truth. That when you say the quality of education is low and poor, and you are firm about it, and you want it improved, I'm happy with you. And that's exactly what Cecilia was. I met her in Dokoro another time. I went there, I had gone there for some bit of work and supervision. And I sat with her at her, she had a small hotel there. I sat with her, then we had a good discussion, took a cup of tea together. She's somebody who would genuinely make a comment and stand by it and say, look, this is what I'm saying. And like somebody said, she called President Museveni her brother. Not that they believe in each other's philosophy, but at one point they would say this country is ours. At one point we talked about the country, and Cecilia is the one of those few, I don't want to say she's the only one of those few who would go out of the country and talk about the country, talk about Uganda. But there are other people who say, Uganda is here. Even when he or she is coming back to Uganda, say, that place. But she would say, yes, we have our own challenges, we have our own weaknesses, but this is our country, and there is no better country than this country, Uganda. So I think really we have lost somebody who would stand up in Parliament and speak, and everybody would admit that she was an eloquent speaker, very eloquent. Everybody would admit that even in Parliament she would whip both the opposition and those in government. And they all believed in her and respected her. So I don't think really we shall get somebody to measure up to her. I don't know. But by God's grace, other people will come up to fill the gap. But she's somebody we have lost. And I really extend my condolences and sympathies to the family. I knew her husband personally. So it is very unfortunate that we have lost her.
All right, from the official burial program that has been issued by the Speaker of Parliament, actually she will be buried in Kole district.
Yeah, it's
that's what we are actually seeing, and that burial will take place on Saturday the 27th of January 2024. Imam Idi Kasozi.
Yes. I have had not very many meetings with Cecilia, but at least I have associated with her. I look at her with two lenses. Lens one, when she was in the Uganda People's Congress, even at a time when UPC was tough talking, I think she used to hold her breath. Two, when she crossed over and became, I think, FDC. And I have had opportunity to interact with her in her own constituency. I don't recall the year, but some time back, maybe 2018 or 2017, we met in Bata. Bata is some kilometers away from Dokolo. And she was a person for all. Bata Muslim Primary School, Bata Mosque, Cecilia constructed for them what we call Waqf, a three-shop building for the community to get resources to support the school and the mosque. People have described her as a very strong Catholic, but that did not stop her from doing a development activity for
Muslim
her,
faith.
for her people. Meaning, therefore, I think Trejo described her well, that she, I don't know whether it was age, but despite that, I think the way she looked at things had some patriotism in her. There was some patriotism in her, which many people here lack. Number two, I think, unlike many other politicians, she was prepared to become a politician by some people.
Groomed.
Yes, she groomed or nurtured or mentoring of some sort. And therefore, she appreciated the contribution of those who shaped her to become what she is. The bigger problem we have today goes back to even the what we are discussing over the technocrats. Many of our politicians do not come to work for this country, they come to reap. And because you want to reap what you have not sowed, you even, when you are reaping, you do it haphazardly. And in the final analysis, even the younger fruits that have not matured, you end up making them fall down and you have nothing to reap from tomorrow. That's why I think what we must learn from her. Then, she was in the women movement, if I can say. But she was a balanced person over this. And despite the fact that probably Mr. Ogwar may not be very much known, we do not see anywhere people saying, because of her position as I think Deputy Secretary General of UPC, later almost at the time she had the UPC herself, now as a Member of Parliament for all those years, we don't see anywhere that she has issues in the family because of the position.
Absolutely.
That to me gives her a plus. God, the one who created her, has decided to take her. We ask the Almighty to have mercy on her.
All right. We'll be coming back to you to dig deep on some of the issues that you have talked about, especially on the leadership side. Let's hear from Ms. Perry.
Thank you, Kenneth. I think for me, first is just to send my sincere condolences to her family. Her son, actually, I went to school with one of her children, Joshua.
Oh.
Will go out, and it's always painful to lose a parent. So my sincere condolences. Now, if you listen to and read what has been written about her, she had qualities that were admirable across the board. Keywords that keep standing out: consistency in terms of the things she believed in. She was not wavering. For those who know how we ended up going back into multi-party politics, she played a very big role. And because of her persona, the kind of person she was, she was able to say certain things which most people would not say. So she was very courageous because she believed in the things that she was doing. She has also been described as assertive, which is true if you listen to her, competent. And for me, those are qualities of leadership that should be emulated. I think for any politician in this country, when someone like, when you read about the Honorable Cecilia Gwal, who passed on Thursday, what do you learn? For me, is the question. Where everyone has very positive things to say. Of course, she might have had her flaws, just like any human being, but her contribution to the politics of this country, to the business community in this country is known. And that's the other thing that for me stood out, is that apart from her being a politician, she was also a businesswoman. You know, she worked in the bank, housing finance. So that tells you that you cannot only be a politician without having other things that you do to earn a living. Because one of the dangers we see right now is people get into politics thinking that is where you earn. And that's why they end up doing things that are not good for the development of the country. They end up abusing their offices to get quick money. So for me, her whole life's legacy is lessons. In the women's movement, many of us knew her because she was in a number of spaces where she would come to talk to women who are aspiring for elective office, those who are already in elective office. And, you know, her demeanor in terms of being able to work across the board, regardless of where these women hailed from, also shows you that she valued democracy, because one of the key principles is tolerance, that even when you don't agree with someone, you can still work with the person. But she was principled and driven by values. And I think those are things that many of our politicians can learn from. Yeah.
Mr. Nicholas Opio.
Deepest condolences to Mzee Lamek Ogwal for the loss of his partner, to the family, the children, Joshua, and the boys and the girls, and to the people of Lango and indeed the entire country. I think the country has lost an exemplary principled leader who has inspired so many people in this country. Her loss at a time when there is a deep deficit of credible women leaders really is a very, very huge loss. I don't think any of the people in Parliament, including the Speaker, can put her name in the same sentence as Imat Cecilia Atim Barbara Ogwal. She was really a person in her own league. Our loss is a huge loss. I have known Imat Cecilia since I was a kid. Yeah, she was a very strong UPC stalwart, rose to the rank of the SG of UPC before she was expelled for taking part in elections. The Obote-led UPC then
Had boycotted
the CA process, and she defied them and contested and took part in the CA debates, and for that she was expelled from UPC. My own late father was a strong member of the UPC, and through him I met Imat Cecilia when I was a senior 1 student in Gulu. Alongside the former Guild President of Makere, Dennis Okema, Imat Cecilia had come into Gulu town to make the case for multi-party politics and wanted to speak to young people. And alongside the late Badru Wegulu, she came along with the late Jacob Olanya, Reverend Willie Olango, Absalom Ongom, and held a meeting with young people at Peche Stadium. I recall that very well because I was inspired by, her eloquence, her drive, her commitment. And later on, when I became an attorney, first when she asked me to write a memo for the Lango Parliamentary Group when UPDF soldiers were killed a chief in the fight over a ranch called Maruzi Ranch. And the Lango Parliamentary Group had come together to petition the president over the actions of UPDF. And she invited me and called me my son to draft for the Lango Parliamentary Group a memo that they would take to Rakitura to meet President Museveni. The second time we had an interaction on a very professional level was when she was involved in the oil debate in Parliament. She wrote a minority report. She asked me to help her write that report, and I authored that report for her. And she used to call me son. I really, the last time I spoke to her is when I came back into the country, and she called me. For some reason, I had lost her number. If you listen to her on the phone, you might think it was a man. And I said, yes, sir. And she scolded me for mistaking her to be a man. And she wanted to talk to me really about the Anti-Homosexuality Act. And she was convinced that they had made a mistake especially to her on the title of the law. And she had told me, I'll come back from the village, we'll have a meeting. You help me draft an amendment. We must change the title of the law. She was convinced about the text of the law, but had problems with the title. She says, how can you be anti? That is inherently discriminatory. And then we had a back and forth debate about that law, and my views about the law is known. And then so it really came as a deep surprise that she passed on. I think she leaves a legacy. Legacy of many fasts, SG of UPC,
major political party,
bigger than the NRM in terms of length of time it's been around. She was involved in the 96 campaign with Paul Kawanga Semo-Gerere, again defying her own party that had just expelled her. She was involved in the formation of the FDC. Later on, also exited the FDC in the way she did, and when Obote's son came back from exile, and campaigned against her, she that was the first time she lost an election. And then when Dokolo became a district, went to Dokolo. So a woman of many fasts, and you've got to give it to her. Her memory will live long after she's gone. Rest in peace, Mama.
All right, Spectrum Extra on Radio 1 FM 90. Let's go for a break. When we return, we'll try to pick on some of the issues that have come up, including a debate that has gone on about women emancipation and things that have been said. I saw Perry in one of the tweets you made. You were actually complaining about a story in the newspaper where they were saying that the government actually wants to scrap, in the bid to reduce the size of parliament, they actually want to reduce, to scrap women representation and impose term limits on them. And Cecilia Ogwal is one of those people who has served for quite so long, and some people were trying to talk about her longevity in parliament and whether it was not long overdue at 77. But let's go for a break. When we return, we'll dig deeper on some of these issues, but also the attributes, the things that you say she stood for. What is happening? Why is it very difficult for us to actually have those kind of leaders? I saw somebody actually tweeting and saying, "Rip Cecilia Ogwal, it's indeed an end of an era," which signifies that a certain caliber of politician has left the stage. What does this mean for Uganda and Parliament?
Spectrum Extra, Fridays 7 to 9 p.m. on Radio 1 FM 90.
Well, thank you very much for staying with us on Spectrum Extra. Coming to you live on Radio 1 FM 90. My name is Kenneth Lukwagadason, your host, and I have a panel of four. Dr. James Tweheyo, the Honorable Dr. James Tweheyo, Mr. Nicholas Opio, Ms. Perry Aritua, and Imam Eid Kasozi. And we're reviewing major events of the week. We spent an hour discussing NAM and the statements that have been made and the key issues that are coming in. But now we are looking at the legacy of the Honorable Cecilia Ogwal, who sadly passed on yesterday. And a number of issues have been actually talked about her. And we've heard from all the panelists here in the studio actually say that she was a politician of a different caliber. And we have comments already coming on the WhatsApp line where people are actually talking about the late Cecilia Ogwal and what she actually contributed to this country. We'll be getting back to those comments and sampling them. There are also other comments still coming in touching the subject that we had in the first segment of this discussion. Well, let's build on that discussion, Perry. The issues that are coming out, Cecilia Ogwal served for quite so long, and she was on a direct seat and then chose to go for a women's seat. And there's been a discussion there about her longevity in politics and what this means for the discussion that has been going on about issues of women representation and how we need to reduce the size of parliament, etc. She was actually one of those people who had actually supported an idea that had been fronted that we should have one representative male from a district and a woman from a district. I followed that debate when it came up when some MPs were trying to propose this issue in parliament. Your take on that?
You see, a lot of the accolades that are being paid to the Honorable Cecilia Ogwal, who is now deceased, is also because when you stay in, especially Parliament for some time, they gain experience. In fact, in most countries, you look like at the US, some of them die in their Senate. They gain experience, and one of the things they contribute to Parliament, or the Assembly, as some people call it, is that when there's an impasse, like when they cannot reach consensus on something, their experience adds value in terms of solving some of these problems. And you see why MPs or members of Parliament usually don't have term limits is because they don't have executive power. So the power to hold the national purse and ensure that services are delivered is not in their power. They only appropriate. That's why in most countries, I don't actually know any country where they have term limits, because that's basically the reason. The executives usually have, especially the presidency, has term limits because of the fact that they hold the budget of the country. And an election helps the population to judge whether they should be re-elected or not. Now, back to the conversation on how, some of the proposals that have been made over the years, is that it's true we need to reduce the size of Parliament, but you cannot reduce the size of Parliament by infringing on Article 21 of the Constitution, which is about discrimination. So you cannot single out one group and say that we will put term limits on this group. Instead, Uganda is party to the African Charter on Democracy, Elections and Governance. There is an article, I think 23, clause 3, which says that legislatures which are states that are party to the convention and their legislatures should strive towards parity, where you have 50-50. So she was not speaking in a vacuum. When we sign on to these conventions, part of it is to domesticate these conventions. If you look at the Constitution in Article 33, it talks about equality, especially in politics. So one of the things that we can do to reduce the size of Parliament is make the district the constituency. Right now we have 146 districts. So if you multiply that by 2, you'd actually have cut the number of MPs by almost
50%.
half. Exactly. So that for me is a better recommendation, because then you are not going to exclude one group from Parliament. Because if we, for instance, if one day we woke up and there was no affirmative action, we would only have 14 women in Parliament, because those are the ones who represent constituencies. So you cannot limit one group from accessing leadership by putting laws that are not favorable to their representation. The population of this country is largely female. We are slightly over 50% of the population. So you cannot say we will put a term limit or an affirmative action. For me, let's move away from affirmative action. Let's have a conversation on parity, because it's proven to be a good thing. You look at countries where you have, women and men almost at an equal footing. It even forces political parties to choose their best. Because if you just have so many people don't even see. But if you have few people, there's more competition, parties are forced to put their best, and then the population is then, given an opportunity to choose from the best than this whole affirmative action. So for me, I'm like, let's just have gender parity. Let's even stop the conversation on affirmative action, cut the cost of Parliament by going towards parity.
Imam Id Kasozi.
Yes.
On this issue of reducing the size of Parliament and the issue of addressing women representation, reflecting on the legacy of Cecilia Ogwal and the long time that he has been in public service as a politician.
Yes, I am one of those people who think strongly so that we should reduce the Parliament. In view of our population and the size of our country and the past, or the economic past of this country, we do not need 529 MPs that we have today. That's absolutely not acceptable if we want to transform this country. And the majority of them are redundant in Parliament. Some of them speak 0 times in the whole year. So that means, therefore, it is one way. 2, the representation should also match population. We now have a constituency which has over 200,000 people represented by one MP, and another constituency of 3,000 people represented. And when the government is allocating resources, they don't go per capita. They go by administrative units, including parish development model money. Every parish, same amount of money, irrespective of the population. That therefore means when you go to share again individually, some are denied. And the only way to work out that, the idea of saying 1 2 representatives per district, I think Kenya has something like that today. I would buy it.
Devolution.
And 2, my issue is not female or male, because by the mere fact when we put affirmative action, many people think when a woman wants to stand in a free constituency, they will tell you, go for yours. That shows the level of understanding of some of these issues. And to that effect, therefore, they have left competent women and have gone for young boys who are not prepared for parliament. And the consequences we can see. Therefore, the idea of reducing parliament, I agree with it. Ratios now, we should go for per capita. Like the way you see NRC when it was starting, the constituencies were determined by the number of people there. That's how then, in 1987, I think, or 89, I don't know when they separated, the biggest area, county that had many members of parliament was this Bokoto of Masaka. Because its population then was 350,000, and therefore they by 70, it had 5 MPs. Okay, but today, even maybe for the hard to go areas, I could maybe leave some room. But for the rest, to me, I think it is better we reduce this parliament. And unfortunately, the MPs cannot. They are even looking forward to increase. So that, yes, look, for example, Ruhinda has 4 MPs.
Ruhinda district.
Do you know that it was the sub-county? Ruhinda was a sub-county from Shema.
Yeah, but
it was
almost all districts were sub-counties or counties.
Those are counties. No, this one was a sub-county. This one was a sub-county because Ruhinda was part of Shema. You see? But now it is a district with 4 constituencies. And that means, therefore, the recurrent budget affects the ordinary person. That's why I go for those who think that we should really reduce this parliament. And maybe we can also go for a 2-what. We have the upper one and the one. Oh, since we have
bicameral system.
Since we have local governments per each district, let the majority of those issues be sorted there. But when we come up here, that's when we shall even have enough money to give back to our local government so that they can operate normally.
Dr. James Tuheyo, the caliber of politician in Cecilia Okwal, why are they becoming so rare, especially in Uganda at the time when we actually need them? What could be going on? What could be going wrong?
The simple challenge is that these days many men and women are ruled by the stomach and not by their brains. I should not be condemned for saying the truth, but in my view, that's the truth. And you see, when you want to know a statesperson, you consider that person who will support something even when it affects him or her directly and touches his welfare. And that's exactly what Cecilia Okwal would do. She would be firm in her recommendation. And yes, you see, we are looking at simply reducing parliament, but in my view, the reduction would be general on the public spending. It's not only parliament. And it becomes a little harder now even to talk of districts, because a number of district sizes were either counties or sub-counties. And it is a tough decision for somebody to take. And as my colleague said, there are very few members of parliament, I can say without doubt, who would stand up and say, let's reduce the number of MPs. They simply look at themselves and say, am I the one to be affected? And in this case, if I am, then what happens? Many would say it after they have lost. Say, let's reduce. With an element and bit of malice, maybe against those who defeated them. Yes, that's the honest truth. But I can say without doubt that Cecilia would stand up and say it even when it affects her directly, even when it touches her welfare. And really, she was a person who would fight for the country. She was a real, I don't know what I should call her, but somebody, a patriot, who would fight and die for her country. Even if it meant leaving UPC, she said, where I'll go, but the fact is, we need to make a new constitution. And no, that's what it meant. For her, it was not all about the party, it was about the country, it was about the people, it was about the affected. And she came up, and I think even in the CA, those who are old enough to observe and see, she's one of those who would be firm and speak for the country. Actually, herself and Matembe, Honorable Miriam Matembe, when you talk of the women's movement, I think they did a great job. Yes, every other person would contribute, but in all cases, even goats, even cows have a leader. And they open the way, yes, they open the way. And these are the people who would trot the untrodden path, and the others would follow them. Really, we shall miss this old beauty. And by the way, people forget that she was one of the first beauty queens of the country. And then
she wasn't Miss Uganda.
The beauty of the person was not only in appearance on the face, but it was measured intrinsic. And I think those people who identified her then have been proved right. If at that time the intrinsic value in her could be seen, this time it was exposed to the very last minute. I will be one of those who will miss Mama Atim Beatrice. Barbara Cecilia Ogwar. I remember her wearing a chitenge and her husband wearing a, she was a family woman, by the way. For those who didn't know her closely, she was a family woman, very close to her husband, very friendly. She would talk to you in your respective appearance. She wouldn't mind whether you are who and who, but she would talk to you as you are. And that's the Atim I know. And really, in this case, the fight for the women, but also for the country. Hers was not centered only on the woman. If the matter came and affected every other person, she would say, no, this one, yes, I would say it is good for the woman, but in some cases, you would say what is good for the goose is as well good for the gander. That's the Cecilia.
Mr. Nicholas Opio, same question I put to Dr. James Doheyo, the caliber of leaders, what could be going on? Is it a problem of grooming? Is it the fact that we are having so many young people rushing into positions of authority, of leadership? What could be the problem? The caliber of leader she was?
Well, first of all, I think we've got to pay due respect to Amat Cecilia and not really begin to discuss this preposterous proposal for term limits for women MPs alongside a statement to honor her. I think she deserves better than that. And so those who are rushing to use her death to reopen a political debate really are not being respectful to her legacy, are not being respectful to her person and to her family, and I think we've got to pay her due respect. We can have that discussion. Let's lay Mama to rest. Let's celebrate her legacy. Really, many things can be ascribed, to come back to your question. But it is a slow degeneration of governance under the NRM. This is what they've given us. Think about the nature of politics and how people are sent to power. In the NRM elections, they line up. A very archaic system of voting They line up people. If your wife or husband lines up behind somebody else, they are pulling each other. It is absolute chaos. No decent human being wants to subject themselves to such a cake, crude, and demeaning process. Elections are about bribery. We've allowed elections to be about bribery and about money. No serious person who has to rule this country based on issues wants to be a party to that kind of process. Elections where if you are the president's opponent, he calls you HIV positive, he calls you derogative names. Really, it takes a lot of guts for people to stand up and take part in that kind of election. So it is a slow degeneration. That is even reflected in Museveni's cabinet. The first 10 years of Museveni's cabinet had people of stellar performance, stellar record. I one time told a minister on this show, I said, imagine Dr. Bulira, who is an ICT expert, as a minister for ICT, and then we come to a physics teacher really, as a minister of ICT. You can see that that is the path he has chosen, that people who have intellectual orientation, deep commitment to this country, perhaps are seen as a headache to the system. So what do? Stuff it with all manners of what he calls fishermen and women. And that really is what gave us. But you also have to look at our education system, Ken. When I grew up, Makerere was a bastion for debate. Like, I walked from Mukono to Makerere to sit and listen to Sir Udo Domade, where Professor Barria was debating with Juko, intellectual discourse, where Professor Joe Loka Onyango was debating with John Jean Barria, deeply intellectual debate. We were groomed to think, we were groomed to be analytical, to be questioning. But the education system we have now is giving us the kind of people we have. I sit on interview panels, sometimes I fail to find anyone to employ. They can't even write letters, application letters. So we are in a society in deep decline, the impact of which we shall see much later. What we are calling primary education is really a joke. And what they are doing now to what they call the syllabus, the new curriculum, absolute joke. And I think that the impact of these on our country will be felt much later. And that translates into the kind of MPs we have. We have people who, the bulk of majority of them came from Radio 1's Chimeza at Obligato. They were just rabble rousers and noisemakers, people who call into FM stations, in some cases, teachers and local councillors, are the ones who have now been stuffed in parliament.
Radio 1 Chimeza had some seasonal debaters.
Oh yeah, I mean, it did
and
have.
They also ended up in the house.
It did have, but it also gave us whatever Penny is. God bless her, the producer of Chimeza, Jakana's wife. They had some great people, Dr. Kayondo, and you can say, but you also have some riffraffs who then found them. Some of them are now ministers. They used to walk in flip-flops here and cheap silk skirts and sweating from the armpit and smelling like shit. They're now ministers, and okay. That's
transform. Focus on what they are now.
That's where you come from determines who you are.
People transform. We should talk of what we are and not what we were.
We have comments.
Has a lot to say. But what we hear has dropped what most of you were. And that's the most important element. You can't talk of your quality. You can't talk of your quality when the quality people cannot consider your quality. You get a place.
I reflected on Mawazo week in Makerere and the brains it could gather.
Mamdani.
Yes. The Kabwejeres, the Red Karujiles, the Kakwenziles, Professor Aruhanga. Yes.
And this guy from
Chango
Kenya, what's his name? The Kenyan
Nyongo.
Who died recently.
There was somebody called Nyongo.
It was this deep debate. Now you go to Makerere, it's like a primary. It's a primary school where the vice chancellor has to see if a professor is teaching.
Well, we have some comments coming in.
Now that the freedom Spectrum is no longer free, so what do you say?
Somebody writes in and says, Spectrum Extra, of course, it's an end of an era from the Cecilias, the Winnie Byanyimas, the Miriam Atembes, now being replaced by praise singers. The party NRM has not allowed real leadership to flourish, and that's Uganda's undoing under President Museveni. Bastardization of intellectuals. Cecilia, God bless her soul, she survived that fate. And then we have another comment coming in from Robert Nkumi, who says, Spectrum Extra, Honorable Cecilia is one of the politicians who will be missed across the country. I admire her for her articulation. In a sane country, who would choose the current speaker over her? Unfortunately, by the time she died, either by hindsight or age, she had become an opposition acceptable to NRM. The country will dearly miss her. That's Robert listening in from Kumi. Henry Rising says, we shall miss Honorable Cecilia. The country wishes her well to rest. The social media fraternity didn't celebrate her death like they did to a certain general. That's a sign that they respected her and appreciated her work for the girl child and the common man. Then, of course, there are other comments that are coming in from the other discussion that we had much earlier, but unfortunately, time is not on our side. So very quickly, let's wrap up this discussion. Dr. James Tueheyo, your closing remarks as we come to the end of this discussion.
Two quick things. Number one, when we talk of G77, when we talk of the other meetings that are taking place, we must also look at all the other things that have been done, not necessarily for these particular functions. Some bit of infrastructure development have been going on. I don't think the airport was made for G77. I don't think the flyovers here were made for G77. I don't think, but of course there are these cosmetic things that were there, which sometimes overshadow the most important things that were done for the country and not necessarily for the preparations for this visit. The second issue is, in all cases, we may have our weaknesses as a country, we may have our flaws, but at least there is some good in us. The fact that the whole world decided to come and sit here and share with us. And lastly, I mourn my good friend, I mourn a good politician, I mourn a mother, I mourn a family woman, I mourn Cecilia, the beauty queen of this country at one point.
Ms. Perry Aritua, your closing remarks in a few seconds.
For me, it's just to say that for NAM, I'm just hoping that our 3-year tenure will yield certain benefits for the country, and that we'll do something with being chair and also managing the bureau. And of course, lastly, is just to celebrate the life of the deceased Honorable Cecilia Ogwal, and to hope that more politicians emulate her qualities.
Very quickly, Imam, your closing remarks.
We do welcome international meetings and conferences, because there is a saying, I think Itueheyo knows it better, that when your own harvests honey, even if you lick his fingers, you will get something sweet. Even if you have not had...
This will no longer leak, we actually eat.
So I would maybe say those who want change must also themselves change.
All right.
And then Cecilia Ogwal, I will mourn her. And Cecilia Ogwal, I want to add the late Muzei Abdallah Kajoba, those who worked at the Ministry of Tourism. You know his contribution. He was buried yesterday. He died at 86. We also send condolences to his family.
Very quickly, Mr. Nicholas Ofio, in a few seconds.
Imat Cecilia Barbara Ogwal, may your soul rest in eternal peace. We will miss you.
All right. With that, we come to the end of Spectrum Extra, this week's edition. Thank you very much, my dear panelists, for actually making time to be with us. And you, the listeners, for the contributions you have made. On behalf of Radio 1, we wish you a good weekend, and may the soul of the late Honorable Cecilia Ogwal rest in eternal peace.
Amen.
Amen.